public is not with her. I want to go to where she was speaking last night, just as Joe Biden was saying this. She's outside trying to do this big presidential like speech, but it wasn't going so well. You know how we know it's not going so well? You got the sirens going on in the background. You get the jeers from the crowd. And it just felt like chaos. Like, do we really want the chaos that Kamala Harris is gonna bring? Sirens and all, ladies and gentlemen, watch her.
Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Americans died as a result of that attack. 140 law enforcement officers were injured because of that attack. And while Donald Trump sat in the White House watching as the violence unfolded on television, he was told by his staff that the mob wanted to kill his own vice president. And Donald Trump responded with 2 words: so what? America, that's who Donald Trump is. And that's who is asking you to give him another 4 years.
Oh, but don't forget, he's a Nazi too, and he's a racist, and he's deplorable. And anybody who supports him is garbage. Okay, what do you think about the sirens? Was that deliberate? Did somebody actually put the sirens in there to haze her or to help her? I think either way you slice it, it was a loss. It was a loss all around, especially given that her commander-in-chief was out there saying this about half the country.
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Yes, okay, there you go. So, Hillary's got nothing on you, right? Hillary Clinton, who went down in history for her use of the word deplorables. This kind of sunk it for her. I think garbage takes it to another level, but let's take a little walk back in time to 2016, shall we?
You can put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
Ooh, funny.
Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. But that other basket...
In other words, they're garbage, right? As Joe Biden just said, you're garbage if you support Donald Trump. You're garbage. And he's a racist, and he's a Nazi, and he's sexist, and this, that, and the other. Just listen to Kamala.
The former president of the United States, who praises dictators, who said there were very fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. Let's not forget, took to social media and highlighted language from Nazi Germany. Highlighted language from Nazi Germany. This kind of rhetoric is unsurprising coming from the former president, and it is appalling. And we got to tell him who we are. And once again, it shows our freedoms and our very democracy are at stake.
There we go. So, and I apologize for the audio. I know sometimes these clips are a little bit hard to hear, so thank you for staying with me, and sometimes you have to turn them up a little bit. But I would just say that Kamala Harris lost the election when she started going from this feel-good personality. Not that ever really worked either, but it was perhaps more effective when she went to this very dark, very angry. And the switch almost happened, I want to say, about 10 days ago, because she realized she wasn't making any headway in the polls. You have the New York Times Siena poll that just came out, and she's consistently doing quite miserably there, in that they are neck and neck. And when you're neck and neck, That's not a good thing, especially as a Democrat, because historically what you've always seen is that the Republicans, especially Donald Trump, is coming up from behind. So she knows she's losing. She knows the internal polling that she has, the super secret internal polling, is not very good. She was actually asked about it the other day, and she's like, oh, no. My internal polls, those are my instincts. So she tried to play that off as nothing and that she has her own instinct on how she's going to do. Well, everybody else's instinct, including that on the campaign trail, is telling her, Kamala, you're actually going to lose this thing. So what does she do? She pivots and she starts going really, really aggressively after him with the Nazi language, with the racist language, with the sexist language. There's a commercial now out. I was just talking about this on Newsmax actually the other night. They played it for me and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's a commercial that suggests a woman is voting for Kamala Harris but not telling her husband, because apparently men are intimidating you into voting for Donald Trump. Come on. Like, if you can't tell your spouse who you're voting for, like, I'm sorry, like, it's just game over. You don't have much of a relationship. Thank you very much. But this is the kind of stuff that they're doing. And so they're trying to divide the sexes this way, just like they're dividing people on racial grounds. They're dividing people. I'm waiting for the young and the old, right? The old being the baby boomers that have all the money, and the young being everybody that has all this college debt. That'll be coming at some point. They haven't quite gotten there yet, but she's saying all this heinous stuff. And she's backed up by the likes of all these MSNBC contributors that are also saying some really, really heinous stuff about how he's a Nazi, and this was somehow the reenactment of what we saw back in the 1930s there at Madison Square Garden. I mean, this is Mika Brzezinski. Some of you have seen this. For those of you that haven't, just understand what's out there. This is her on The View.
You need to believe him, and these are the final hours. We need you. We need you, and all of you to vote.
Yep. There you go. So, Mika, I think you heard us before you came out. We were talking earlier about yesterday's Trump rally from hell at Madison Square Garden. So what did you make of it?
Well, I think it was everything that you need to know about Donald Trump in one weird white nationalist Nazi-type rally. And, of course, there's historic parallels to where and when this happened. But
follow up to your remarks.
She goes in for that, and she's going to talk about the historical parallels, which are just a whole bunch of nonsense. It just so happened that some bad people, some white supremacists had this rally thing back in the 1930s, and it was at Madison Square Garden. So we're going to cancel Madison Square Garden? Like, how are you equating one with the other? And don't you think for 2 seconds that maybe that's kind of a big leap to make? I mean, kind of a big leap in that if you were somebody who lost a loved one during World War II, if you are Jewish, and your population was nearly annihilated during World War II, maybe you might not like that. But you see, this is what they do. There was a great story. Oh, I can't remember where it was, but there was a great story just the other day. Maybe it was in The Hill. Maybe it was Washington Examiner that was talking about how they went after Barry Goldwater in a similar way, and they were calling him a Nazi and a fascist and this, that, and the other. And this is their MO. This is what they do. The former Bush press secretary, Ari Fleischer, was on TV just saying exactly this. And he's like, look, I am Jewish, and I am really offended that they keep going back to this well over and over and over again. It's a pretty horrific time in history. Is it not trivializing it to say what they're saying? Here's Ari.
First, I'll just tell you, this is what the Democrats always do. They called George Bush the same things. They called Joe Biden said Mitt Romney would return African Americans to chains, to slavery.
I remember.
And they called John McCain Hitler. They called Mitt Romney Hitler. Now they called Donald Trump. This is the classic Democratic playbook. And here's my point about this, Harris. There are still Americans alive today, me, whose lives were actually touched by the Nazis. My family, my mother, her brother, and her parents fled the Nazis in August of 1939. They fled Hungary to escape. They got on what my family thinks is the last ship that crossed the Atlantic Ocean, the last passenger ship, before the Nazis start to sink every ship that crossed the Atlantic Ocean through their U-boats. This is my family's story. We had to flee the Nazis. And for Donald Trump to now be called Hitler, to be called a fascist, to be compared to a Nazi, is the lowest of the lows by Kamala Harris. I don't know to whom she is appealing. This is an American election between two candidates who may not like each other. But for Harris to stoop to the low of saying that Donald Trump is the equivalent of those who caused the Holocaust, who killed millions, not to mention who killed millions of veterans who had to fight the Nazis for freedom to win. She's saying that's who Donald Trump is? She didn't win a single vote in her primary. There was no primary. She was put into power by the Democrats. Donald Trump won a contested primary. He beat other Republicans fair and square in an election. He likely is going to beat Kamala Harris fair and square in an election. They don't like losing, so they call him a Nazi. Donald Trump is actually the essence of democracy. But nobody in American politics should compare anybody to the Nazis. That's who my family had to flee from.
Thank you. Really powerful statement from Ari. And it's what I've been saying over and over and over again. Like, you don't throw that stuff around. You don't use those terms lightly. Why would you ever go there unless you absolutely had to? Because it's trivializing everyone else, everyone who lost their loved ones. It's just wrong. And yet this is what they're doing over and over and over again. Kamala Harris is doing it. Debbie Dingell from Michigan, the representative, went on and tried to warn Muslims. It's like they'll just use it for any group, right? For women. I think Mika was on a Morning Joe saying he's going to kill us. He's going to kill us women. So they'll use it for women. They'll use it for Muslims. They'll use it for blacks. They'll use it. It's just divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. They'll do it for Latinos. This is what's going on, guys, okay? We get it. We get it. This is an act of desperation.
And the Arab American community needs to be reminded and cannot forget. He wants to ban Muslims, he wants to deport Muslims, and he wants to start internment camps. And that's what we are busy talking to every voter. He's telling you what he's going to do. Believe him.
Internment camps?
Yes. He has talked internment camps. You know what, Jake? You may have to visit me in one. I get worried enough when he talks about what he's going to do to his political enemies. But he has talked about them in this with different groups of people.
Well, I've heard him talking about rounding up undocumented migrants.
Even Jake is like, lady, you're way out over your skis.
And obviously for that, you would need some sort of camp. But what do you mean internment camps for Muslims and Arabs?
He has spoken about that in different audiences. I don't have the exact citation right here, but I'll find it for you. And he's been very clear. And I've said to the community, I'll never forget when he kept his promise that he was going to ban Muslims.
All right. So again, let's go back to what Ari said. When you start throwing around these kind of accusations and this kind of language, you ought to, for the sake of history, for the sake of everyone that died, be able to back it up, like have something. And instead, they're just throwing it out. And then if you don't agree, suddenly you are the problem. You are the garbage. What, are they going to lock you up too?
Or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, his demonization.
Disgusting. Really, really disgusting. Now, Joe Biden, they may need to take off the campaign trail. They may need to retire him because between this and what he said the other day, I'm beginning to think he's just trying to do her in.
It sounds like if I said this 5 years ago, you'd lock me up. We got to lock him up. Politically lock him up.
Politically lock him up. Yeah, that's what I meant, right? That's what I meant.